Hello and welcome to the Vinny Brusco Show podcast, episode number 423. This week's episode, I am joined by Mikey Brackett. Mikey is a yoga instructor. He is a therapist. He is a coach. He is a men's group facilitator for the Journey Min, JRNI, which is the group that I got my certification through. And he is also the host of the Peace Warrior podcast. Mikey is a therapist who brings yoga and his experience on the yoga mat to the world of therapy and coaching and gives his clients a perspective shift and the realization that they have opportunity and they have a out from their current state of where they are. And he presents that in different perspectives and gives them the realization that they can choose a different way of thinking, feeling, and ultimately a different way of being. Mikey and I got into a whole heap of things, whether it be culture and the importance of discipline and the gut and brain relationship and the ego and consciousness. We got into a whole bunch of stuff. So I hope you enjoy episode number 423 with Mikey Brackett. Enjoy.
Mikey Brackett, and welcome to the Vinny Brusco Show. I am a mental health therapist and a coach, and I'm happy to help you along your journey if you have any interest in taking your next step forward.
And here we go.
What's up, man? Doing well yourself?
Not too bad.
Just messaging you.
Oh, yeah.
I was just staring up at the corner. I felt like I was in the Blair Witch Project.
That's funny.
How are you?
Doing pretty good this morning.
Yeah. What'd you get into? I'm sure you have like a very regimented routine.
It's not that regimented. It's part of it's just necessary. I wake up usually and just take my dog right outside for about 30 minutes to an hour and let her run around and say hey to other dogs and stuff. And then I just made some coffee and come back inside and eat breakfast and scroll a few things and try to get my mind in a good place. And usually by this time I'm headed to the gym or something, and then the rest of the day is full of clients.
That's good. Filling up your day with clients. That's always a positive.
Yeah.
Are there a lot of coaching clients or more of the therapy work?
More therapy clients. Coaching clients are here and there. They're not as consistent as far as like referrals or outreach and stuff like that goes. But as a whole, yeah, it's primarily therapeutic clients and other things here and there.
That's cool. What kind of therapy would you say you do mainly? Is it like trauma based? Is it cognitive? Like where are your main focus?
Yeah, I mean, it's really all over the place. I really pride myself in the fact that I can work with whatever a client needs. So I get people from all over the place that come and they're like, oh, I need this, or I need this, or this is going on here. And we just jump right in to figuring out what's going to really help them and work well for them. So yeah, some of it's cognitive, some of it's very like structured, some of it's neuroscience heavy, some of it's somatic heavy, some of it is trauma based, some of it's very mindfulness based. But the underlying kind of theme is for most people, I'm trying to help them clear out whatever it is that's getting in the way of the ways that they want to feel or the life that they want to have. That's my big focus, is like helping clear out blockages and shift things in drastic ways for people.
I think that's a big thing for people. I think that is the underlying common thread throughout whatever, whether it be cognitive or trauma based, whatever therapy or coaching people are doing. I think a big part of any client is part one, wanting to be seen, right?
Yep.
Seen and heard for their authentic self. And removing all the facades and the masks that we build up over time and allowing someone to see you so that you can see yourself and then bring that self to light and bring it out into the world.
Right. Yeah.
Now, I know you do. Ken, I'm sorry.
Oh, and I was gonna say, as I help people do that, one of the things I really hone in on from the therapeutic perspective is finding the things that people can't even see, so that they can then see it and do something with it.
So trying like kind of putting a blind, showing them their blind spots.
Yeah, showing them the blind spots, or even just introducing things to them that they'd never thought about or heard about. I mean, one of the cool things about doing this for the 10 plus years that I've done it is I've learned so much, and there's so many perspectives and so many modalities and so many ways of trying to understand what happens to people and why and what helps. And so I can really bring so much of that to the table with someone in a conversation and say, hey, like what you said or what you're describing can be approached from this angle, this angle, this angle, or this angle. And it sounds like what's going on for you is that these two might be really worth looking into. Let's jump into that and find out what's there for you. And usually people are like, oh my gosh, that's like totally talking about what's going on here, or that gives me so much to like think about, or da 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 da. So in that sense, that's kind of a cool piece of the therapeutic work that I like.
Yeah, showing kind of like the different pathways that like life could potentially go and our perspective of those pathways. And, you know,
Mhm.
it's like going through a dark tunnel, right? And you have like this flickery flashlight and you don't
Yeah.
know which way to look. And you know, it's kind of running out of batteries and you're kind of just scratching
Mhm.
and clawing to get to the end of the tunnel. But
Right.
there's so many little corridors you can go down that might take you a completely different path.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
So I know you do a lot of obviously you're a yoga instructor, you're a therapist, you facilitate a men's group through Journey.
Yep.
Um, who are your main clients? Is it men? Is it because now like a lot of this Jordan Peterson kind of
Yeah.
thing is coming to the forefront of culture now, with him being kind of lambasted, I guess, to some degree by Marvel, and
Oh,
them
that recent thing. Yeah,
yeah, they're
that's
making
fucked
him
up.
out to be Red Skull and
Right.
saying that, you know, he's only speaking to disenfranchised white men,
Right.
um, which is crazy because, you
So
know,
crazy.
I facilitated a men's group. I did a group last night with truth tellers. We kind of combined groups, and the diversity in the group
Mhm.
and the culture that's in the group and what everyone's bringing to the table in the group is
Mhm.
what makes the group. You know,
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
just a bunch of disenfranchised white guys, right? It's a
Mhm.
diverse group of people. And
Yeah.
yeah, we're a men's group. So yeah, we're all going to be men, but
Mhm.
we're all coming to the table. I think it's a disenfranchised culture.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
So who are your primary clients? Are they disenfranchised white guys?
No, they're not. I mean, if I look at my schedule from this week, I've got all peoples of color, all peoples of different background, almost every, almost one person from every age group. Um, I don't have anyone on my caseload over 60 right now, but I have in the past, and I don't have anyone on my caseload under 8 years old right now, but I have. I used to do a lot of work with kids. But between 8 years old and 60 years old, I have at least one person on my caseload from any gender, orientation or concept, and any, not any ethnic background. There's obviously there's so many, so there's no
Right.
way I could have one person from every potential ethnic demographic. But in general, like it's not just white people. Um, there's Black people, there's African, there's Asian American, there's Pacific Islander. I mean, all the different things.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, I think it's a cultural disenfranchised culture, and I think it does stem back to
For
our
sure.
youth and what we're taught in school, and we're not taught any of the modalities or any of the expressive ways to handle
Mhm.
ourselves or to handle each other or how to deal. Dealt with it on a very surface level. There's no depth involved, and it's hard to integrate depth at a young age. But at the
Mhm.
same time, it's probably the easiest because the brain's more palatable and receptive, and these neurological pathways haven't been calcified over 30, 40, 50 years. So if we're going to make an impression, that's the time to do it.
Oh, 100%. I mean, the the psychological research when I was in the prime of like learning was saying that the first 5 years of life were the most absolutely formative for everything that would take place thereafter. In the past 10 years, it's even been refined down to say the first 3 years of life, including the in your utero times. So in that sense, if we're thinking about like the trajectory of a person's life, it is formed according to the psychological research within the first 3 years. Which, if you think about who a person is in the first 3 years of life, they're not autonomous. They can hardly speak. They probably can't wipe their butt. They don't even know what an opinion is. Like, and to say that those things are, that's where you as a person are solidified. And you think about all the information that comes at a person within that time. There's a lot more grace that's needed in our understandings of how to work things out and how to process things so that people can actually heal and be whole. Because so many of us are working with conditioning, priming, solidified neural pathways that we had no conscious, autonomous control in shaping. Now, the powerful thing about being an adult or like going to therapy or coaching is you get to take a hand in reshaping those things, and it's incredibly possible to do it. And I think it's so cool to watch that happen. However, like there's a little bit more understanding we need as we approach some of these different things, at least from what I'm seeing socially.
Yeah,
I.e.,
I have two little kids. My daughter's 6, and my son will be 2 in a few weeks. And it's to the point where you're saying is that essentially we're just pure essence, right? We're just pure. There are no. There's input, but there's just a purity to that age. Even my daughter, now that she's getting into school, you start to see the cultural impact. You start to see her doing comparison. You see her in that kind of now culturally being impacted by school and teachers and her parents and her brother. But at my son's age, where he's 2, he's just, pure essence and pure energy and just food, poop. He walks, he talks, he yes,
yeah,
please. Like, so we're
yeah,
trying to shape him into not being an asshole, right? That's the goal. But then there's like, how much of that are you stifling his own potential growth? And it's such a balancing act. And people don't have that awareness around that, especially growing up. And we kind of just we dump our own shit onto our kids, and then they grow up. And I think that one of the goals of human existence is to just evolve and create consciousness and trim the fat around, the person, right? So my goal is to make my children a better version of me, a better version of my parents, of my grandparents, and
yeah.
to evolve. And that's how we evolve as a culture.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And I mean, you were saying like your goal is not to make him a little asshole. And it's like, no one's an asshole at 3 years old. No
Right.
one is.
Right.
Somebody might be struggling as a 3-year-old because of their environment and because of their wiring. So that the biological, system that they are. However, no one's an asshole at 3. But if that's the judgment on people and that's what they're carrying into the world, is that you are this piece of shit thing and you have zero connection to that, that's like a whole, I'm kind of going off a tangent, but like it's just not fair.
Yeah, no, and I say that obviously jokingly, right?
Mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm.
but the
Well,
idea is you want to input social norms and expectations, right, that are culturally appropriate, but you also want him to stay true to who and what he is. And you're absolutely right. Like, there's no malice behind him. He doesn't even
yeah,
know how to, like, you do hear that a lot in parenting where it's like, oh, well, children are manipulative. I'm like, how can children be manipulative? They don't even know they can't even attach a feeling to the word. Like, that's not even in their zeitgeist. Like, that doesn't exist for them.
it doesn't exist. Their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed and won't be
Right.
until they're 25. So like lay off. Stop projecting your shame onto your child.
Right, exactly right. That's exactly right. But again, it's hard to navigate those waters as a parent or even just socially, right? It's hard to navigate that. And you see that in adults as well, right? Like, interacting with adults, you get to, I mean, from my perspective, I was looking like, well, they're just big children who have never dealt
100%.
with any of their shit. Like, never went introspective and never kind of handled what comes up for them.
Yeah. I mean, I did a post on Instagram about that, I don't know, a month or so ago. And I just said, you're just a big baby or something like that. I tried to do something witty that would catch people's attention, because that's what you have to do on Instagram. La la
Right.
la. But it's so true. Like, we are just like, each one of us is such a child. Hence, like, all the things about inner child work and parts of self work and all these different things, if you've ever heard them before, around like what's so vital for you as a human to be able to evolve and grow in healthy ways. Um, but yeah.
Well, it's weird because there's the hierarchy of needs, right? I've been like really thinking about the hierarchy of needs lately, and then the conscientious hierarchy of needs, right? And we go through the channels and the steps, and you could put each category, whether it be shelter, food. What do you consider food? Is food a can of beans underneath a highway,
Right.
or is that your shelter and your food, or is it a filet mignon in a mansion, right? Like, yes, all your basic needs are met, and that's super important, but then we get to actualization, right? Self-actualization. And
Mhm.
where people, in my opinion, and what I've been toying around with in my mind is like, people don't break through the self-actualization, right? Because on the other end of self-actualization is conscientious awareness, right? And now that hierarchy of needs. So what we do is we stay in this funnel of self-actualization, then we go back down and we try to make those categories bigger and better, right?
Right.
And we stay in that cycle. But
Mm.
so many of us get to actualization, and it's a blessing to get there. But then what do we do with that, right? How do we establish a new relationship with ourselves on the
Mhm.
other side of that?
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, I feel like if I'm trying to answer that question, like, what do you do with that? I think you just live, you live. And in your living, you interact and you share, and you let your presence be the thing that not only defines your reality, but helps encourage everyone else into the fact that they can have a different reality. Um, I recently started a podcast with my friends Reggie Hubbard, who is a yoga instructor that does a thing called Active Peace Yoga in Washington, D.C. And he and I had one of our first conversations with a guy named Mark Whitwell, who is he's a yoga teacher. He's in his 60s, 70s, maybe a little bit older. But he's been in the yoga world forever, and he was trained by some of like the old school, like original yogi guys that like before um, yoga became this Western thing. And his big shtick is constantly trying to reaffirm to every individual that what he says is, you are the power of the cosmos. Like, that's his line. And basically what he's doing, he's like, you are, and that is good, and that's enough. And like, if you live in that, then like, and you follow that, and you preserve that, and you cater your life and your circumstances to the sustaining factor of that, then like that changes things around you. um, and I think so much of self-actualization from like a Western perspective is all about the next thing. And we don't give ourselves permission to be like, hey, like, it's okay just to live.
Yeah, we always have to be striving for something. There always has to be this
Right.
metaphorical finish line, or this next thing that we acquire that's going to
Mhm.
give us happiness or joy, when realistically speaking, to his point,
Mhm.
you are, right? You are already that, in my opinion, you're already that thing. You're already that person. That already exists. You're
Mhm.
just, it's like what Michelangelo said about David, right? He was like, David was always there. I just had to carve the stone around him, right? It was already, the essence of David was there. I just had to move everything to reveal who David is.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between something like act as if, rather than like fake it till you make it, right? Like
Totally.
the second self in psychology, the idea of like, you already are that person, live as that person. What would that person do in this moment,
Mhm.
rather than just kind of piecing it together as you go?
Right. Living consciously as opposed to impulsively or compulsively.
Where does ego fit into all this? Because again, with the men's group that we had last night, and I did a no BS coffee conversation with the truth tellers on Tuesday, ego was kind of, it was around, the idea was around fear and holding yourself back, but it really does, as the conversation progresses, it turns into a conversation about ego.
Sure. I guess it just depends on which way you're looking at ego. From the Freudian perspective, ego is just one aspect of the self. Jung broke off from that a little bit and defined things a tiny bit differently, which I really like the Jungian thought on so many things. But in that sense, you have the id, the ego, and the superego as the structures of the self, all the subconscious. The typical image you get, when I taught psychology at the college level, one of the typical image that I would show on like a slide is the image of an iceberg. And the iceberg, the tip of it is what people see of you. That's usually the constructs of the ego and the process between the id and the superego that you reveal to the world. Yet underneath the surface is all of this subconscious material where all of this stuff is worked out. And so in that sense, the ego is just a function of the self that tries to interface your nature with like your nurture. So you have your inner biological drives and things that just make you a functional being on a biological planet. Um, some of those are impulses, some of those are whatever, and then you have your social self, and you have the superego, the morals, the ethics, the standards, the expectations, the needs, the cultural, norms and biases, and you're constantly pushed and pulled as a person in between those things. Do I want to go do this, and this, or do I need to do this, and this? And so the ego plays the role, loosely speaking, of trying to manage that. And depending on how you struggle with any of those things creates the illusion of self that is on the outside. And oftentimes because of the lack of consciousness around that process, we get fixated on ego because ego is the thing that kind of drives the bus. It's the thing that has the most like pulling together power, and people can get over identified with how it is that they, wrestling with themselves in their life, think about themselves. And so ego plays a role in some of this from the perspective of learning to see that you are more than what you think you are. And the more you can release the fact that you think you are something and you should be something, or you're proud of the fact that you are something, the more you can step into actually beginning to learn about yourself and others in a way that's less threatening and hopefully more satisfying. But the ego is very much afraid of stepping into that space because you don't have control of the other.
Right, that's the unknown, right? That's where the discomfort lies, right?
Right.
And I think a big part of the ego, and I want to kind of branch off from the ego into like shadow work and that type of thing. But I think the important part of the ego is your relationship with it,
Mhm.
and how you can actually shift the ego, and the ego will works. It works ultimately. It works for you, right?
Yes,
Um,
it's supposed to. Yeah.
so my example that I give a lot is early in quarantine, I started doing yoga, right? I've done yoga before, not to your level, but I've done
Well,
yoga before. I throw on my black swan, 4:30 in the morning, I'm on the mat. And the
I
girl
always go to bed at 4:30 in the morning.
and the girl's a complete L, right? She's like, all right, get your legs up, and she's an
Um,
L, okay? And
yeah.
I am tight hip flexors, I have tight hamstrings. I
Mhm.
am not a yogi. So my legs are bent and they are shaking, right? I'm just like, now it's
That's
4:30 in the morning. What happened?
that's not the point. Just
Yeah,
because she's a male doesn't mean she's a yogi, and just because you're a pretzel doesn't mean you're a yogi.
exactly right. But so everyone's sleeping, and the voice in my head is like, what are you doing? You're
Mhm.
embarrassing yourself. That was the term. You're
Yep.
embarrassing yourself.
Yep.
Stop it.
Right.
So the
There it is.
right, there it is. The voice in the woods that's trying to detract me from ultimately being the best version of myself, right? So I'm sitting there, I'm like, first off, and I'm having this conversation in my head. First off, who am I embarrassing myself in front of? There's
Right.
nobody here.
Yeah.
It's me
Yeah.
and the TV, right? And
Mhm.
now I've gotten through that. I got past that point. Now I do a workout in my garage, and the voice now is no longer, what are you doing? You're embarrassing yourself. It's, let's go. There's
Yeah.
no time to bleed. It's David Goggins now, right? That's the voice in my head now. It's motivating, it's inspiring. And when I start to struggle, it becomes, that's great. Let's keep on moving, right?
Right.
So it's the same voice, right? It's the you, right? Saying you could do this, let's go, keep on going. But it's the
Mhm.
relationship with that.
Right. Right. Totally. Yeah, and so much of these internal structures of who we are, whether they be parts of self, ego, blah, 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 they're all there just trying to help us cope with what we're afraid of. But there's that process of getting to like wrestle with yourself, wrestle with life, engage with it, actualize it to where you see like, oh, I don't have to be afraid of this. I don't have to be afraid of looking funny in stretchy pants. I don't have to be afraid of puking because
Love
I was
those
on
pants
a
now.
sweat. Like, all right. It's like you don't have to be afraid. Like, what is there to be truly afraid of in that? And again, it's usually all the same stuff like rejection, isolation, lack of belonging, not being seen, not being heard, all these like attachment kind of wounds or social wounds that we carry. However, like your higher self, or however you want to refer to it, your true self, your core self, the self, can step in these ego dynamics and say, like, hey, like what's really going on here?
Mm.
And just provide that like subtle, like easeful, like, oh, hey, like I'm choosing to do this yoga because I'm hoping, investing, whatever in feeling better. And it's like, okay, like I get the fear, like this is new, this is scary. I'm a white dude and this is some skinny, flexible, whatever chick on the TV, because that's how Western yoga tends to look. Like
Right, right.
it's like it's all those things of like, if you wanted to break it down, you could say like super ego is being like, you don't belong here, this is not your thing, you're supposed to do this, da, 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 da. And
Go
ego
back to
says,
bed.
hold on a second, yeah, right, go chop wood and eat a hot dog, chill
Right,
out, stop.
right, right, right.
Like, what? And that's where all this masculinity and femininity stuff comes in, is these ego dynamics and stuff that we're unaware of. But like, um yeah, it's like you can teach yourself how to be with yourself. Therapy is helpful for that, coaching is helpful for that, practices, spiritual disciplines, things like that are all super helpful. And it's a way to like stop the reactivity and chill the noise out for a second so you can actually hear what's going on.
Yeah, that's where the sensory deprivation tank has been like my
Oh yeah,
go-to. I'm a
that is fun.
huge I'm a huge sensory deprivation tank proprietor and advocate, and I work pretty closely with my local place in regards to like clients and helping people use
Cool.
sensory deprivation as a modality for introspection and kind of
Yeah.
unpack some of that stuff. Yeah, that silence for me, whether it be in meditation or yoga, um, even if like a hard workout. I know you're a big CrossFit guy, so even like
No,
after a big CrossFit workout, like you still have that like energetic dump where like you have like this clarity that comes through, and it
yeah.
like it speaks clearer, than kind of it resonates on a different level.
Yeah. Yeah. After like a good trail run or like a good workout are some of the best times for me to like journal. Like if I try to wake up and journal, it just doesn't work. But if I do a good workout or yoga or like a trail run or something, like then I'm in a much clearer space and I can journal for days. But it's like we have to learn how to like clear out the noise in ourselves. We have to learn how to shut out some of the noise of the culture in the world so that we can actually tap into what's going on inside of us. And things like workouts are biologically proven to be able to create that reality, which is like so cool. You can biohack yourself with yourself.
Right. And now, is that just based on the fact that you're coming out of like a flow state and something that's like autonomous, and you're just kind of moving and your body's kind of on this kind of autonomous action reaction kind of phase, and that gives your opportunity, like your mind, an opportunity to kind of like compartmentalize things? Like what's happening afterwards that you feel like, oh, I could just kind of unpack this now?
I think it's just part of it's the way I'm wired, and I would argue that I think everybody's wired a little bit like this to differing degrees. In my therapeutic practice and coaching practice, I use the Enneagram a lot with people to help them understand themselves and find ways forward through different things they might be facing. And the Enneagram is a personality inventory that's gotten so popular over the past like 5 years. It's really silly. I've been working with it for like 15 years, and um, I'm a body based or a gut type on that diagram, and people who are gut types or instinctual types, as it's described, really have to like use their body. You experience the world in a very visceral way. You interact with it in a really visceral way. So for me, with how I'm wired, those things just work well. And then, I mean, there's so many books on this stuff out there, but a really great one that came out recently is Kelly Mcgonagall's book, The Joy of Movement. And she talks about like why movement's so helpful, not just like CrossFitting or whatever you might do. It doesn't have to always be hard. even though there's some really awesome research on like what heavy weightlifting can do for your brain and your body. But that book, The Joy of Movement, really just taps into like how we're all wired and what is just so fantastic about the fact of what happens when you use your body. I forget what it's called. It's been a minute since I've read that, but I want to say that in her research, and she talks about it in the book, that like she discovered this thing that they started calling like the happiness molecule because it was something new that they had never seen before. It wasn't like endorphins or like different like hormones that we all know about that happen when you get into like a good state, but it was like it was like something that was in like very different that was showing up about what happens when you move your body. And I forget what she calls it, but that is such a cool finding. And if we think about like why it is that you might be able to connect with yourself or connect with other people or feel better or overcome depression, or like for me, be able to really journal and get into something, is like something is actually turned on in my body that allows me to do that because I've used my body well.
What's the origin of that? Like what's the cogs that are going on? Is that like something neurological? Is it something physical? Is it something like on a brainwave state, or is it just a kind of a combination of all of them, and it's just being kind of uh, manifested in the physical body, or is it something kind of subconscious
It's an actual physical uh,
reaction?
biological thing. And as all things work in the human system, it's neurological, it's biological. Like your brain's doing a thing, your muscles are doing a thing, your endocrine system's doing a thing, your digestive system's doing a thing. That's telling this what to do. So it's a massive feedback loop. Um, but yeah, check that book out. I'll have to look it back up now that I'm talking about it, so I can better think about it.
Send it over to me.
Yeah,
I
every
had
time. Yeah.
I had Dr. Mcgonagall on. He's like one of the world's leading scientists and doctors with the gut biome.
Oh, cool.
And we were talking about that and the relationship of the gut, and we were talking about Blink, the Malcolm Gladwell book,
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
how the brain and the body have this relation, like the gut and am I purple?
Yeah, you just turned purple.
That's crazy. Okay, well, I guess we'll be purple for this podcast. But
Oh, we're
how
in the chocolate factory over here.
there you go. So like how the relationship between the brain, and the gut create
Mhm.
like this, and now you have a white light around you. Look at this. We're going into some type of going into some state here. I'm with it. Um, so like how that relationship and how like the gut's like really the first brain, and like there's like you said, like it's a gut reaction, right? We refer to these things and we have these kind of cutesy
Mhm.
little t-shirts around them, but there's
Yeah,
actually data and there's actually like a reason why we say these things.
right.
And so much of it we interfere that gut reaction or that gut instinct with thought, with logic, with ego, with interactions, and that's what kind of stifles us from actually growing and developing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We self-sabotage so many things that are just natural all the time, which is like in the therapeutic world, one of the most powerful tools I've seen in like helping with that is a thing called somatic experiencing. If you've ever heard of it, it was developed by a guy named Peter Levine, which if you haven't heard of him, check out his stuff. There's a few books he's written that are super phenomenal. And if you as a person feel like you struggle with stress, anxiety, um, you struggle with trauma, um, PTSD, CPTSD, other things like that, like this intervention is phenomenal because what it does is, as opposed to like just doing the things that we do because we're trying to think through it or we're trying to do this, we're trying to do that, you just let your body merely feel through it. You don't try to like figure anything out. You don't try to necessarily get into all the emotions of it. It's just all somatic work, and it's so cool because we think our way out of things. We interject shame and guilt on things. We get wrapped up in emotions. We even like force ourselves physically to do this, that, or the other. And we get really so disconnected from our bodies. And there's so much information there. And it really is fascinating and cool to see all the research and the information that's come out in the past 10 years, especially over like how important the gut really is, and like how our diet and all these things are just so fucked up, especially in the United States, and how really getting your body back in balance and your gut back in balance can be so transformative for so many levels of like your own health.
Yeah, he was talking about the relationship of poor diet and the healthy gut and its relationship with autism. And
Oh,
they're
it's
finding a
huge.
lot of research now with that healthy gut biome and shifting autism
Hmm.
and adjusting it on the spectrum of things.
Yeah, I mean it's insane the amount of things that we non-consciously just consume and do that are creating massive problems. I mean, this is something I think about all the time as far as like my own diet because of like doing yoga and CrossFit, like things like that. Like, and I have certain food allergies, so my body's like very sensitive to what its input is. And unfortunately, I am not the best at times of like making better choices about what I put in. I mean, I do a pretty freaking good job. I mean, I've got like vegan shakes that I do all the time. I'm eating salads and grilled chicken and all this stuff all the time. But every now and then it's like I get off work, it's late. The only thing open is like whatever. So I go get some like chicken fingers or something. And it's like, gosh, the fried stuff is destroying this. I need to like not make that choice.
Yeah, it's the
But
same
that's the
thing.
norm for so many people is just
That is that.
fried this, fried that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like again, with having two small children, you do your best to try to
Yeah.
input and be like, okay, let's have some fruits and vegetables. Like my son only eats like he literally will not eat meat. He eats like fruit. Like that's what he loves. Like he'll just eat fruit, which is great. And I'm like, all right, cool. Like try this. My daughter, she'll like literally have a bone hanging out of her mouth with a lamb chop, and she's like just an animal. But again, like they finish dinner. It's like, oh, I could pick at this little piece of crust, and then all of a sudden, like,
Uh,
why'd I do that? Like that was like not the thing to do right now. I could have made a better choice. I want to go back to one thing you said about like anxiety, and I think we're having culturally there's this big. The word is so I don't want to say it's overused, but it's
for
really
sure.
become this like badge of courage and this badge of honor that people are like,
Mm.
I have anxiety, I have
Yeah,
this,
yeah, yeah. Hmm.
and it becomes an identity, if you will, that
Oh yeah.
people give themselves. And a lot of
Yeah.
times I hear people say that, or whether it be a client or whomever, like you don't have anxiety. You may experience anxiety, right? And
Mhm.
you may experience it pretty frequently, but you don't.
Yeah.
You have brown hair, right? You
Right.
don't have anxiety. And
Right.
the reality is, people like will own the fact that
Mhm.
they have anxiety, right?
Yeah.
But they won't own the fact that they don't have anxiety, right? They'll very easily say, I have anxiety. But if you try to shift that and say, no, you don't, say you don't have anxiety, they're very uncomfortable to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's so many levels to what that is or what it could be, at least from what I've seen. And I think a big part of it is like just lack of internal connection to yourself. I do a lot of like emotional coaching and stuff with my clients, whether they're therapeutic or whatever. And so many times someone will be like, oh, I have anxiety. And I'm like, well, what do you mean?
Mm,
They're like, oh, I just feel anxiety. I'm like, no, like, what does that mean? What does that look like? What does it feel like? How does it show up in your life? When does it show up in your life? And so many of these things like depression, anxiety, I feel good, I feel sad, like they're just trash can words, is what I call them. They're just like you just throw a word over in the thing and hope it lands in the bin, you know. And it's like it's a throwaway word. It doesn't mean anything because it's not connected to experience. It's not connected to insight. It's not connected to processes and realities, relational, exchanges. And so a huge part of what I do when I encounter people with that, like that, or that comes across something I'm expressing or someone's expressing in therapy is, hey, like, let's get into what this means. What does this anxiety feel like to you? What does it feel like right now? If you're saying you have anxiety and you're
right.
saying it's showing up right now, what is the flavor of that anxiety that's happening right now? What was the flavor of it yesterday? What was the flavor of it the day before?
Because
You
you
might,
have it. You're
yeah, like,
saying you have it, so
yeah,
then you need to have it, right? Like it's like
right,
it's like when you go to the doctor, right? It's like I feel like a 1 or I feel like a 10, right?
yeah,
It's still there.
right,
It's
right,
you're saying that you have this thing.
yeah,
So it's a great point. What was it yesterday, right?
mhm,
Was it at a 1 or was it a 10, right?
mhm,
And what is it now? Because you have it. Or do
mhm,
you experience it like most people in waves? And how do you handle those waves? How do you surf those waves?
yeah, yeah. The language I encourage people to use in this is to say I struggle with. I struggle with anxiety. I struggle with depression. I struggle with, and the subtle semantics of that I feel like are really empowering, because it's like, oh, like I'm interacting with this thing. It's not a part of me. It is not me, but it is something that is coming into my sphere of existence that like is causing some problems. And maybe it does feel like it overwhelms me at time, or maybe it does feel like it is the only thing I experience. However, I struggle with it. And I feel like the language we use with ourselves is so powerful. And so sometimes, whether that, fits for somebody or something else does, learning how to shift like the dynamics of how you're speaking about something can be super helpful. And I think, to speak to some of this on like supporting those people who feel like they do have, if they're using that language, anxiety is, I mean, our culture is still so hard-headed and resistant to mental health. It like it
Do you
just
think
blows
there's
my
a shift happening? I feel like there is a shift, and maybe it's because it's in my zeitgeist. Maybe it's because I inundate myself with this stuff on a fairly regular basis, so I
Sure,
do see it more and more. Do you think that
sure.
there's a cultural shift happening, or is that just the Bader Meinhof?
No, I mean, there's a cultural shift happening. And the fact that like in the past 5 years, there are now apps for mental health, which I do provide support through to people. And like that's mind blowing. And one of the things, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, but my hunch is that the shift is happening because millennials and is it Gen Z? Is that the,
I don't know any of those things.
yeah.
I don't even know what I am. I'm 30. I'm 37. That's what I am. I don't know.
We're on, I think you and I are on the line of Gen Xer.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine.
Yeah. So it's like there's like a Gen X millennial line that's like 81 to 83 or something like
Okay. I
that.
was 84. So
Yeah. So in that sense, it's like we're right there at that cusp, but the like my the millennials, like my younger brother or like clients that I have, like the younger generation, they're more wise in accepting to mental health. And then the younger generation from them, people born in the 2000s are even more like wise up to them. And people who were born in 2000 are now 21. So it's like um I feel like those generations are really way more tuned into the idea of like mental health and way more accepting of like getting help and talking about it freely and doing that kind of stuff, whereas like people from our generation and even before still are very much like, you don't have a problem. like
right.
like if you would have said, let's just take this back like 15 years, if you would have said like, hey, I have anxiety, how would have people responded to you?
Right. Right.
you know and I think a part of that is like now there's language for it. Now people can like actually get support and not be shamed for it, whether they're a guy or a girl or however you identify. Like there's a less of a like grip on these like archaic ideas that say that you can't have these problems, that is freeing. And in that there may be, as it tends to be with anything human, an over identification with certain things because there's a fear of it being dismissed or dismantled or ignored. So I could see that being a part of this as well.
Yeah, and we also are kind of going through this very weird time
Mhm.
where people are in a position where there's a lot of opportunity to do self-reflection, and there
Yeah.
is opportunity to sit in that discomfort, whatever wherever it comes from or whatever comes up in it, and people
Mhm.
are kind of now questioning the status quo or what they've been doing, or
Mhm.
the cards that they've been dealt, and there is a lot in there that you can learn, and there's great opportunity in that, right? In the unknown, there's still there's both sides, right? There's the fear that you can lean into in the
Mhm.
unknown, and there's the love that you can lean into in the unknown, and
Yeah.
it's just a matter of where you want to put your energy and your focus on, and
Mhm.
guide down that tunnel rather than going down the other one.
Sure. Yeah, totally.
I want to ask you, how did you get into all of this? Like what's your background? Like, what's your journey? Like, what brought you to this work?
Yeah, I mean the activating event for me that really blew this open for me and invited me into this whole way of like showing up in the world was the fact that in college I had a really one-off opportunity to have this internship. Um, I, I had a professor that was like, I've got a crazy challenge for somebody who wants it. It was like the first day of class or something. My we'll just say junior year of college. He's like, who wants it? And I just raised my hand. I was like, I'll do it. He's like, all right. And so he pulled me aside and he's like, I need a few other people. So other people like raised their hand and did that thing too. And after class, he's like, okay, I had this really cool opportunity for you guys to be chaplain interns at Vanderbilt University Hospital. And I was like, huh? Like, what's that?
Okay.
And it's like, and he goes, and since you raised your hand first, you and we're going to take you to this other place within the hospital. And so like, the next coming weeks, we do like an orientation. We meet with like the chaplain, find out like what a chaplain is, what they do, how it works. And so what my like assignment or internship was I was a chaplain intern, or basically just a chaplain at Vanderbilt Hospital in the cancer ward. So every week for X amount of months throughout my junior year, I dress up, like look professional, go to the cancer wing of the hospital, check in with the nurses station, see who was anyone who just needed somebody to talk to. So like on a lot of hospital intake forms, or at least what it used to be, is you have all this crap someone has to like fill out. And then at, somewhere in there, there's like, do you have a religious affiliation? Do you have psychological needs? Would you like to see someone to talk to? Like, would you like someone to come by and check on you that's, not a nurse? And that section of the intake form would be the thing that nurses would like pull out and put in a file for me and say, hey, we have 5 people in today. Of those 5, these 3 had requested to potentially meet with someone. This person's in treatment right now. This person's in this room. You can go with them. This person's over here. They'll be back at this time. And so I would just go around. I'd do my check-in, go stop by rooms where people were in care, whether it be like acute care or, more significant things, or if they were just doing their part of fighting cancer. And I'd go sit in the room and I'd be like, hi, like, this is who I am. I'm here to just chat about anything you feel like you need or answer any questions you have. And um, people would just be like, yeah, I'm just here again and this sucks and blah, blah, blah. Or like family members would be in the room and they'd be like, hey, like, we're really struggling with this because we got this diagnosis and it's getting worse and we don't understand why. And so people would just like talk about like, some people were religious, some people weren't. It didn't really matter to me. I didn't care. Well, it wasn't the point. Some people are like, well, why would God let something like this happen? Or, I had beat this 5 years ago and now I'm back and I don't understand like what's happening again. Or like someone would be like, yeah, this is just the norm for me. This has been the past 2 years of my life. I come in once a week, we do the thing, da 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 da. Some people were like really, really down about it. Some people were resigned to it. Some people were trying to fight it. And I would just sit in those rooms for however long, sometimes a few minutes, sometimes longer, and just listen to people. And
Did
after
you
that
feel
experience,
did you
what's that?
feel equipped for that at that time? Because as a junior in college, I don't
Yeah,
think you could have dropped me in that. I mean,
yeah,
I was, I studied psychology and all that stuff. I don't know if I would have been equipped to have uh, the answer for someone to say, why would God
sure.
do this to me?
Right, right.
Now I would probably feel more comfortable providing my perspective of that.
Yeah.
But at that time, what was going through your head? Why did I raise
Yeah,
my hand?
right, right. Yeah, I mean, for me, I think this is why it blew it open for me, is I never
Sure.
knew this was a thing. Like, I didn't grow up in a culture and in an environment that even like acknowledged that therapists were a thing that exists. It's like if you had a problem, you go talk to like the coach or the pastor or whatever. Um, Psychology was not a thing that I even really like understood or knew was a real thing until I got to college, which is bizarre to think about. That's what happens when you grow up in the South.
Sure.
But for me, the thing that was like so like mind blowing, but is it felt very natural. I didn't try to answer. I don't remember trying to answer a lot of questions that people would have. I just remember like holding space and listening and just naturally reflecting back of like how scary it was to them. And so in that sense, was I equipped for it? No. Did
Right.
I feel equipped? I don't think I really even thought about it. It just felt like, oh wow, like I'm in this space with these people and this is really hard. So I wasn't intimidated by it. I didn't feel overwhelmed by it. I didn't feel like confused by it, but I definitely was just like, whoa. And then after that, I was like, hold on. There's a thing that where people do this, and this is like a career, and this is what helps people, and this is a way to help people. And then from there, it was just like one thing after the other. Going to grad school, getting my mental health degree, starting my private practice, all the things. But
Right.
that was like the pivotal shift for me of like, realizing that there's a whole different way of showing up in the world to help people.
Yeah. And I want like yeah, and we've gotten away from that culturally. You know,
Mhm.
when you go to more indigenous cultures, there's the shaman, there's the elders, there's the people of the tribe that you can go and speak to and unpack your shit to.
Mhm.
And whether that be cancer or whatever it is, there's opportunity for that expression of yourself and what you're experiencing, what you're going through. And they don't
Mhm.
necessarily, like you said, they don't necessarily have to provide you with the answer,
Right.
because so much of that answer really is within yourself, but they're just
Right.
holding the opportunity for that space, for you to kind of like the alchemist, right? It's invoking what the person knows within themselves and
Mhm.
allowing them to bring it out, through just kind of walking through it and talking through it. That's crazy that, right? That serendipitous, universal, right? Like you couldn't plan that if you wanted to.
No. And the funny thing is, like like I said, I think I was a junior. And he's like, who wants to do something hard? And I'm like, I'll do it. Like 20, 21-year-old me. It's just like,
Yeah.
yeah, let's do it. And I had no idea what it was. And then all of a sudden it's like, here's what it is. Whoa.
Yeah, and it's a different kind of hard, right? Like it's not like
Oh,
this traditional, like, all right, let's go move this pile of wood and bricks. You're like, oh shit, no, this is a real hard. Like this is an emotional, mental hard. What's your experience with clients or yourself with like plant medicines and those types of modalities? Because culturally they're becoming more accepted. Cannabis was just legalized in New York. Psilocybin, there's a big shift culturally with that and what's going on there. And then you're hearing way more about ayahuasca and all these kind of modalities that people are using to break through the veil of life and see what is going on behind the scenes. What's your relationship with that?
I mean, I feel like okay, let's see. How do I approach this? um,
However you want.
I have some like harsh opinions about it. And then I have some like fanatical, like on board opinions about it.
I go with both.
So the whole resurgence of mushrooms and the psychedelic use of mushrooms therapeutically, I am like beyond stoked about. The research is there, it has been there, that it is super helpful in a therapeutic setting for all kinds of problems, and it is transformative on infinite levels. There's a whole story there that I'm sure you might know about and other people probably know about, where our government shut that shit down and pharmaceutical companies came in hot. And it's like, that pisses me off. So as far as like things like psilocybin and the other types of chemicals that are a part of different mushroom um, compositions, like that stuff to me, I'm like 100% on board with. And I would be very happy to learn a lot more and even offer that through my practice as soon as it becomes legal. Because I really, the stuff there is fantastic. Marijuana and ayahuasca, I feel like I'm a little more skeptical of, not because of I don't believe in their power, but I heard something really fascinating one time by one of my friends who's worked with an organization that is in Costa Rica that does a lot of ayahuasca like retreats, and they're super legitimate. And I would even consider going there. But he said something that each plant has like a spirit to it. And if you as a person aren't in alignment with like the spirit of the plant, you're entering into like a space that uh, really requires a high level of like reverence and continuity within yourself with what's happening. And the harsh kind of judgment I have on some of that is like, there's so many people that are just doing the ayahuasca thing because it's cool, or they're doing the marijuana stuff because it's fun, and it's like they're not taking it seriously. Um, However, I do believe when you take those things seriously and you use them medicinally, the benefits and possibilities that are there seem to be so cool. And obviously with things like marijuana, using it psychologically, there's not much information there. There are like the cannabinoid systems within the brain and stuff that people are
Sure.
researching, which is like super cool. And then ayahuasca is its whole other thing. Um, and so in that sense, like I don't have a ton of experience personally with them. I have heard a ton of stories, And from people that I know that work with those things on a regular basis, it seems to be, what stands out to me is that there's not enough reverence that people are taking into these practices. They're not treating them as practices, they're treating them as experiences. And I think that's a big difference. And I think that's just a cultural problem that we have, is we treat so many things as like experiences, and that we don't see them as like a practice. And we don't see that there needs to be deep intention and commitment to the whole cycle of what's happening, as opposed to like, oh, I'm just getting high, or oh, I'm just doing this thing. And everyone's looking for like this like big epic thing, but it's like, that's not how these are meant to be used. Can they provide those things? 100%. But the
But so can
relationship,
your yoga mat, and so can,
yeah,
my bike, and so can, a float tank.
yep,
And it makes sense because, I mean, you have different strains of obviously cannabis. You have indica, you have sativa, and
mhm,
obviously those react with your body in different ways. So it would
yep,
make sense that the ayahuasca plant has a different chemical makeup and a different energy, however you want to frame it, that
yeah,
would react with your body or give you input or potentially insight that's
mhm,
not going to gel necessarily with your chemical makeup. So
sure,
it would maybe create a bad experience, right?
sure,
But I think there's still information in that bad experience that
mhm,
you could walk away from and, integrate into your everyday life. But it
totally,
goes to your point, like, even, I grew up Catholic, and, when they transform, or when they change the bread, the Eucharist, into the
yeah,
body and blood of Christ, how
right,
many people are going up there with reverence and treating it like this is actually what's happening? And how many people are going up there because this is what I do, this
right,
is what Sunday is, this is
mhm,
my experience with that.
right,
And they don't take it to that internal level of, receiving God, or however you want to frame it.
sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, and so in that fact, like, I'm stoked about the fact that we're getting, at least culturally, a little more brave, and the fact that we can break away from the big pharma stuff. There are a lot of there's a lot of great value to pharmaceuticals, and I would never dis discourage someone who needs one from it. Um, However, I am super excited the fact that there are more natural ways that we're pushing into and being less afraid of as a culture that could be really helpful for people.
Yeah, and to take it to a less psychedelic, less, taboo
Mhm.
version of that. It's a matter of taking Advil, or choosing to just drink some water and give yourself an opportunity to hydrate and clear a headache, or maybe taking some CBD rather than taking an Advil, right?
Yeah,
I used to be like, yeah, I'll take an Advil, like it was no problem, right? And
yeah,
then, like, as I started to evolve and grow, is like, well, like, what is that doing, right? That's just like trimming the leaves off the branch. I'm not getting to the root of the problem. I'm probably dehydrated, right? I don't haven't And, like, reverse engineer that stuff, and rather than just going for a quick fix with any of this stuff, whether it be cannabis, ayahuasca, psilocybin, Advil, whatever big pharma thing you might have to or prescribe to you, you're not getting to the root of any of it. And that's just on, like, the everyday basis. But how many people are like, oh, my back hurts, taking an Advil, rather than sitting
yeah,
in pigeon pose for 15 minutes?
right. Yeah. Yeah, we as humans tend to be our own worst enemy in the fact that we choose the easy thing over the intentional thing,
Yeah,
because it's not always
being
hard.
humbled. Being
Yeah,
humbled is a great teacher.
right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, those dichotomies that we run into where we're so stuck in the ease or comfort, we just have to like show each other that it's not as hard as you think, that like you're supported in that, that you can do it. I mean, that's one of the things about my therapeutic practice and coaching practice, is like I'm so much of the time empowering people to realize that they're far more capable than they realize. And so you can break patterns, you can break cycles, you can get out of comfort, you can step into discomfort, you can step into intentionality, you can make a conscious choice to like drink water as opposed to pop an aspirin or whatever, and trust yourself that you are actually doing something that's going to work. I think so many of us give so much of our power away to food, to pharma, to whatever, because we don't believe that like we can actually do what we need to do, or that if we do it, it'll actually make a difference. And so there's a massive like level of distrust I think all of us carry on who we are as people, that if we could learn how to reclaim that, we would radically change our health on so many levels, and maybe even the health of our communities.
And you have to test that in small doses, right? And you have to
Oh,
prove
sure.
that to yourself in baby steps in small increments. And then it becomes like a feeling. And then you could, then you could bring up, quantum physics and, the best version of you and the feelings and tapping into that rather than, staying where you are and leading into discomfort and placebo effects and all that fun stuff. But
Right.
it really is about, experiencing that and using that experience and the feeling, right? The feeling that you've gained, the wisdom, the knowledge that you've gained through that experience, and using that feeling to, to move forward, and then applying it to other versions of that, right? So
Well,
it may just be this, but it's in a different makeup, a different suit, a different version, but it's the
yeah.
same thing, right? It's bring up, it may not be a 10 in the doctor's office, it may be a 2, but it's still the feeling, and not allowing that feeling to calcify as an emotion.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
How
I
has
mean,
yoga kind of
when,
rolled into your practice? I would finish with your point. I'm sorry, but I want to know how yoga kind of bridges the gap in this for you. But you had a point there you're going to say.
oh no, I was just gonna say that like so much of like the work I do with people is around helping them build themselves up in that area so that they can like ease into the process and take a chance here and take a chance here, and even know that like, oh, I can use this thing here, and I can use this thing here, and I can use this thing here. um, and then to your question, as far as like how does yoga show up in my practice? Well, pre-COVID, I would offer yoga therapy, so like actually getting people moving in session with what they're processing using asana, and pranayama and meditation practices to create a therapeutic experience. Now, with COVID and all that, that's pretty much gone in my practice, unfortunately. However, yoga is more than asana and pranayama. It is also self-study. It's also, showing up in the world. It's also a philosophy. And so, in that sense, I am integrating the philosophical perspective of the history and the full nature of what yoga is and can be into almost every conversation I have with someone. And one of the most clear ways that I do that, and I do this with so many different perspectives as I introduce them into a therapeutic or coaching process, is I'll say something like, from a yogic perspective, dot 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 dot. From a psychodynamic perspective, dot 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 dot. And so I'll like make these shifts in conversation and give these like little nuggets of things or these perspective shifts for people to look at and apply in their life to different things so that they can help give themselves options to shift what's going on internally, which at its core is like a big part of what asana is you use your physical movement to help shift what's going on internally. And since I can't necessarily do that in Denver, or haven't been able to do that in the ways that I want to, yoga is still happening in my therapeutic space. It's just not physical movement, which is only one branch of the tree of yoga, is the physical movement. So in that
But
sense, I apply it all over the place.
the essence of yoga is still being communicated to your clients,
Oh,
although the
100%.
physical. Yeah, yoga is funny. I really, I find it very humbling, and I enjoy it thoroughly. And it's funny because it is one of those practices that you get a good glimpse when you could, and it's very rare for me, but when you can hit like a flow, like when you can hit a flow and you feel like, when you like, I can't explain it, but there's an energy, like there's just a fluidity to it where it's just like this mind body connection vibe, and it just flows. You're like, okay, but it's so quick for me. Like I don't stay in that space very long. It's very similar to like, the 0 point of the sensory deprivation tank. It's a peck on the lips and you're out. Like it's
Yeah,
just a taste of the potential of it. For
right.
me, my go-to is Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, yeah.
And for it's very similar, right? It's this, physical strain and struggle and fight. It's a literal fight, but it's philosophy, it's life, it's math, it's science, it's the human chess game, right? And I was rolling earlier today with my professor, and I mean, he's a black belt, and he could just dial in at different levels whenever he wants. It's so amazing. And he literally had my back, and he's just slowly just choking me. And it's funny, and rather than like I wanted to leave that situation. So my brain literally went, and I told him this, I was embarrassed to say this, but it's the honest truth. I was like, my brain went to everything else I had to do for the day. I was thinking about the grocery list, how I pick up the kids, because I didn't want to be there, right? My body didn't want to be there more. So my mind was like, I'm checking out. See you later. Like, I'm leaving, body. And I told him afterwards, he's like, are you serious? I was like, dude, I hate to even say it, but the truth is, like, I checked out, and I was just like, this is
I'm dead.
Yeah, I'm done. Like, a man's trying to kill me right now. And I'm thinking about, like, I need to pick up salad stuff for dinner tonight, like, because I didn't want to be there. But, it's that brain. And I recognize that, right? And there is value in that experience. And I've had the same thing with yoga or even CrossFit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so much of like growth happens in those spaces where you have that sensation of your body being in a tough spot, and you keep your mind present, yet not hyper aroused.
Yeah.
You're not like, fuck, he's on my throat. Like, that's hyper arousal. That's not presence. But you're not hyper aroused where you're like, oh, like, I could have a salad in, later tonight. And you're like, it's like,
right.
Okay, hold on a second.
Okay.
Be present to the experience and involved in it, and like wrestle with it with yourself. And like, that's where, that's why yoga is so powerful. That's why probably things like jujitsu are. I haven't done jujitsu in forever. That's why things like CrossFit or weightlifting are so helpful. It's like you reach these edges where you go into different default modes. And the more you can push up against those edges and not allow yourself to go into default mode, whether that be freak out or collapse or whatever it might be.
Or go through your list of things you have to do.
Yeah, right. The more you do that, the more you're going to grow, and the more connected to your life you'll actually be, which is like so cool.
Yeah. And I said that afterwards. I was like, listen, I snapped back. I caught myself in that wave. I was like, oh, what am I thinking? I was like, I have a man trying to kill me right now. And I'm thinking about the grocery list. So I snapped out of it. And then obviously I tapped shortly after. But I wonder, and I spoke to him afterwards, and we were kind of unpacking that. I just wonder, there was no chance of me getting out of it, but I just wonder, would I have gained another second of time? Like, would I have had another moment, and maybe that would have opened up a new opportunity, and that would have created a new default. And so I was like, there's such value in what I could label as a failure or a loss, right? But I could also take it as a learning experience and go, okay, well, next time I won't go so far down the grocery list. I'll stop at the lettuce. I don't need to get to the tomatoes, right?
Right. Yeah, you'll realize what's going on, and you'll make a shift.
I'll probably still tap out, but it might just be one extra second. But that one extra second can make all the difference.
Oh, totally. Which is a part of like the growing process, is to recognize like, oh, like, especially if we're talking about mental health and things like that, or like coaching and, deprogramming or, unwiring negative belief systems, you have to catch yourself going down that path so that you can get off of it. Otherwise, you're just going to keep going down it. You can't just be like, okay, I'm never going to have this negative thought again, or I'm never going to like struggle with anxiety again, or I'm never going to like think about the grocery list again. You can't just like, I almost said blue balls, which I just did say it, but
fine.
Like, you can't white knuckle it all the time. You have to be like, oh, there it is, come back. Oh, there it is, come back. And that's like the teachings of yoga too. It's like, and now the practice, and now the shift, and now the breath. Like, it's always a like corrective, so that flow can happen.
But we have this weird relationship with right and wrong, and I think a bigger relationship that's very toxic is with discipline, right? Our relationship with discipline culturally is, and I think it spans human culture, right? Our relationship with discipline is so harsh, right? We are our own worst critics, and you could put that under ego, whatever it is. It boils down to like the discipline, and the word discipline, when you think about it or you bring it up in conversation, it's an automatic like, I'm in trouble. Oh shit, right? Rather than like changing the relationship. Same thing with anxiety, changing the relationship with the word discipline, because discipline, Aristotle, Jocko Willink, whatever you want to call it, discipline does equal the freedom, and whatever that freedom is to you, financial, spiritual, whatever it is, not going down the grocery list. You need to implement discipline, but our relationship with discipline, I think, is a very toxic one.
Oh, 100%.
How have what have you come across with discipline relationship, and how do you kind of handle that with your clients, or even in the yoga practice? How do you kind of manage your own discipline, or how do you apply that to your clients?
I mean, I feel like every conversation I have with a client, whether it be coaching or therapeutic, is on some level consistently geared at having a disciplined life. Now, whether I'm overtly explaining that or not, I don't think that's true. However, it's this idea of, well, I think the problems with discipline is we have learned that discipline equals shame or guilt. And that's not how it works, whether it be, discipline in the form of punishment, as we tend to think about it, or whether it be discipline in the form of structure. There's an over association in our psyches around guilt and shame that gets wrapped up in discipline. And so much of like stepping into a disciplined life or learning how to, activate discipline in healthy ways, if you're like a parent or whatever, is learning to reconceptualize the fact that discipline is based off of a proper understanding of what it means to be human. Discipline is the understanding and the right alignment of yourself with what is true. And so in that sense, a disciplined life considers everything that is true about you being a biological and psychological system as a human being. So discipline looks like getting my butt to the gym, drinking enough water, putting good stuff in me, sleeping the right amount, like all the like training protocols. It also looks like having a structure with my mind, being wise with my words, investing in learning, like all these things. And all of those things are disciplines because of the fact that they are in alignment with what it means to be a healthy, proper, high functioning human. But because we interpret so much shame and guilt immediately, almost knee-jerk reaction to things like discipline or like structure, we sabotage our ability to actually experience the kind of life we want to have. And so a big part of that process, I feel like in my therapeutic practice, as well as what I do with myself, is just a reminder of like, I'm human. I need to sleep, and I need to sleep this amount. And so that means I need to go to bed, or that means I need to wake up. Not in a shaming way of like, hey, you stupid idiot, get out of bed, or hey, Dumbo. But that's what we do with
I
ourselves.
do. I know that. I laugh because I know that, right? Like,
Yeah.
dummy, get out of bed. Like, dummy, get out of bed. Like,
Yeah.
I know that narrative.
Right.
I wrestle with that narrative, and sometimes that wins, and sometimes it doesn't win, and I put the air quotes around win. But I laugh because of course, that's part of being human is that relationship too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why discipline is so polarized in our culture. It's either people are like, don't tell me what to do, or people are like, I'm going to do 50 things before 6 a.m. And it's like, Jesus, like, can we get off of the like punishing ourselves passively or aggressively for what we don't understand about our own humanity and our own selves?
Yeah.
So the invitation in that is like, hey, learn about yourself.
Right.
Learn about your body, learn about your brain, learn about your digestive system, learn about your spiritual system, invest in learning, like do all these things, get in touch. And then when you get in touch, then the discipline is freedom, like as Jocko and like Aristotle and people like that say. It's like, then it is freedom because it's like, oh, like this is going to enable me to be better, feel better, do more, enjoy more. But you have to really get over that shame hurdle and like really confront yourself in those places.
Yeah, and the weird thing is that when it comes to, because I try to be a 4 a.m., 4:30 a.m., and that's only because of my circumstance, right? Because my wife's a teacher, so I need to be, when
Yeah.
I was, when my kids were in school and I was working, so it was a whole system that I had to create around my life in order to work out, because I knew, or get in yoga, because I knew those things lended themselves to me being happier, healthier, mentally more present, more patient in all aspects of my life. Then I recognize, well, that does work for me. So let me do that all the time. It doesn't work that way, right? So you need to be adaptable. Like right now, I'm in the stay-at-home role, dad, right? So, when my son wakes up in the middle of the night, whether me and my wife go in, like, he's up, right? So I can't wake up at 4 a.m. if I was just up from at 1:30, 2:30, 3:30. It's hard, and I have to give myself that grace and go, all right, I'll tell you not waking up at 4, buddy. Like, you got to find that workout somewhere. So you need to have the discipline, but you also have to realize that, like, it needs to shift, and it needs to, you can't be so regimented, right? Because circumstances in life changes. And we culturally, I think innately, I think we're lazy beings, right? Like, it would make sense to conserve energy, right? It would make sense to conserve the energy, but that gets to a fault too, right? Where we get to the point where we're just like, nah, I'm not doing it at all today now.
Right. Yeah, we're our own worst enemies in that sense.
And then we beat ourselves up when the alarm goes off and we're like, snooze, snooze, snooze. And then all of a sudden, you don't get my old narrative. And the reason why I left was because if I didn't get to the gym or, pre-COVID, I would just be like, you piece of shit, you fucked up the whole day, and now I'm like, and now I give myself the grace and I go, all right, you need the sleep. You need the sleep. Right. So where can I sprinkle it in throughout my day? Can I do it? And if not, then okay, it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that shift into grace is so helpful, and also the shift into like keeping yourself accountable too. If it's like, I think those shaming narratives and mentalities we get into also give us an excuse not to be accountable. It's like, you piece of shit, you didn't work out, and it's like, okay, I fucked up, I'm a piece of shit, and then you go out the rest of the day. It's like, no, I'm not a piece of shit. I didn't work out. What happened? Did I need the sleep? Was I like avoiding something? Was this going on? And to be able to say like, oh, today I needed to sleep. Like, I looked at my Whoop and my recovery was shit. So actually I really did need to sleep, so I can like tone down the self-criticism a whole bunch, if not completely. And then other times it's like, I slept in, I didn't get the work in. Well, what happened there? I was like, okay, man, like, get with it. Not in a like asshole way, but like, okay, we see what happened. Like, all right. But like, that's part of discipline too, is being able to like see yourself, hold space for yourself in a gracious way, but also in an accountable way.
Yeah, the accountability and the discipline, they go hand in hand, and they can feed each other, and they can work, in congruence with each other, or they can just completely derail you. But the awareness is what comes first, right? The awareness of all of that. And that kind of goes back to the previous point of like that self-actualization and that awareness point and that awareness piece where it's like, there's the awareness. What do we do with it now? We go back to the feedback loop, and we go back and we get the bigger house, the better car, the bigger meal, rather than kind of crossing the threshold and going like, all right, well, let's go into this side of the world and see what's going on there on the quantum realm of things.
Right.
Do you dive into like quantum and all that stuff in your practice, and that future self and that feeling guidance type of thing?
Yeah, I do future self stuff on a regular basis. I actually posted something on Instagram as like a guide for people on like an example on how to do that, which I like a lot. As far as like some of the really Dispenza-esque stuff, I'm not too deep into all of that. I appreciate it, and I think a lot of it's really cool, and it's a growing edge for me to like learn about it more. But there's so much value in shifting your perspective, and I feel like at the core of so much of what I understand about that stuff is it's just changing your perspective.
Yeah.
Getting out of the like mental emotional traps that we have either been programmed or conditioned to have, or that we've created for ourselves, and to try to step into something different and see what's available if you do that.
Yeah, because that's a great point, because there is a feeling to the quantum thing, right? Like when you like, it's a buzzword. Let's just call it for what it is. But there is, and whether that actually exists, and there's alternate versions of me, and they're on different timelines, and one made this choice and one made that choice, and one does this and one does that. It doesn't really matter because I don't know for fact. But all I can do is pull a feeling out of those versions of me, right? And if they all do exist, I need to tap into each version of me and say, well, this is a feeling I do like, and this is a feeling I do want to recreate in other avenues of my life. This is a feeling I don't like. I don't want to recreate that. And whether they're actually happening in a quantum aspect of life, I have no idea. But they're essentially a feeling, and I want to recreate the good feelings and eliminate the bad feelings, good and bad, air quotes for, whatever. Right. I want to eliminate the bad, have more good. And that's what I want to propel. And that's what I want to snowball. And that's the inertia I want to build behind who I'm going to show up in the world. And I'm going to do my best to act as if I am already that person.
Yeah. I mean, that makes a ton of sense. And it's really empowering to know that you have the capability to shift. I think so much of what leads into things like anxiety, depression, and there's so many other potential mental health diagnoses or issues. It's just I talk with clients about this all the time. Like, we have to help you realize that you have options. So many options are available when you shift, or even just being able to make a shift. Because the thing I've seen to be so consistent is when people do not feel like they have options, people turn into really messy, dangerous things.
Yeah.
And just
you shut down.
You shut down, you freak out, whatever could happen.
Start going through your grocery list.
Right.
I had no options. That's a version of it, right? That is a version of that. I had no options. I couldn't even think of an option. I was like, I thought of one, it didn't work. And I was like, well, we're leaving. Okay. Like, I'm just see you later. But that's a version of it, right? That is another version of it.
Yeah. And when you help people learn, or when you remind yourself that you have options, whether that be a quantum thing or like a circumstantial thing, the amount of relief that can come is huge. Like, you can get up and go for a walk later today if you notice something's bothering you. That is an option. Is it like the most significant transformative option? Maybe not, but it is an option and it's available to you. You can take a breath, you can drink some water, you can call a friend, like, you can read a book. Like, are all of these things in and of themselves the answer? No. But if you actualize and tap into the many options that are available to you, even if the sky is truly falling, like, will that lead you a little bit further on to where you might have access to other options? 100%.
Yeah.
And that's so much of like the therapeutic training that I do with people. It's like, we got to help you get in touch with your life and your empowerment and your capacities and what's available to you. And when it's dark and you don't have any options because trauma's kicking you in the face, then we stop again and we say, okay, what options are even here? And that's the stuff that makes so much difference. And in that sense, like, all the manifesting stuff, the quantum stuff, I think it's just a constant reminder of you have options, and those options are actually really good. And that's really cool to think about.
Yeah, and like, to your point, the option could be as simple as like stepping aside and box breathing, right? Like, that's an option, right? Like, if you're feeling overwhelmed, you have an option to do that, right? Whether you take that option is another conversation, and why you would or why you don't take that option is another conversation.
Right.
But the reality is that option's there, right? Do you want to reach out and grab it? And if you do, then do it. And if you're not doing it, why? And how can we get you to take steps towards doing that? And maybe it's not a full breathwork ceremony. Maybe it's just a quick box breathing, or maybe it's not, reading a whole book. It's reading an article or a passage, or, an inspiring word, or maybe it's not doing a CrossFit workout, but it's going for a quick walk and just grounding yourself into the moment and being present, right? And not allowing your mind to go back or go forward, and just try to stay as present as you can, as consistently as you can.
Yeah, 100%, which is like what it means to be an adult.
and learning to respond to life rather than react to it, right? That for me was like the line of demarcation. If someone's like, when did you become a man? I would say, like, again, right, that's an age-old question, but I would say, like, when I became a competent human being is when I learned that I have the ability to respond to life, and recognizing that space, right? It's a superpower. Time slows down. Like, you could slow down and manipulate time when you are, I hate the word triggered, but when you're triggered by something, right? And how you either respond or react to it. That gap of time can feel very, very tangible.
Yeah. Oh, it totally can.
You know,
And
when
I mean, I like that. I like this. Like, when did you become a man? When I learned to respond. And it's like, yeah, that seems legit. And in that sense, it's like, well, it's probably a whole nother podcast, but like, what does that say about how many actual men, quote unquote, we have in our culture?
Oh yeah. And then the interaction. I mean, I think of, I was in the car business for 10 years, and just thinking of all my interactions went from early on to later on when I started to go internal and change my mindset and learn to respond rather than react. And you think about that, and it's to your point, like how many men or adults even, right? How many adults do we have in culture who can who can use their superpower and freeze time to respond appropriately, whether it be in parenting or, at a traffic light or at Starbucks or wherever it is. And again, those are just different versions where you learn to respond to life rather than to react to it.
Right. Yeah.
Mike, where can people, do you like Mikey or Mike? I didn't even ask you. I'm sorry.
Everybody calls me Mikey.
All right, I'll go with Mikey. That's fine.
Official name is Michael. So
all right.
I will respond to either. Just don't call me purely.
Mikey, where can people get your services, find more? Where can people dive into your work?
Yeah. So my website is mikeybrackett.com. So MikeyBrackett.com. You can find pretty much all the different things there. I try to keep it updated as much as possible. And then the other big thing is Instagram. It's at mikey.brackett. And I'm pretty active on there, whether it be just reposting things in story or putting up posts or different things like that. And I try to offer just like meaningful, thoughtful content. I don't have like a spiel or anything. And then that I'm like trying real hard to do on social media. Maybe I need to work on that. But yeah, those are the two major platforms. There are a few other podcasts that I've been on. So I'm sure if you hop on, Apple or whatever and search my name, you might find a few things that I've contributed to in the past. And then, yeah, if you want therapy services or if you're interested in coaching with me, you can find me at my website, or as you as well, Vinny. We are part of a community called Journey, JRNI. And they have a whole list of coaches that offer all kinds of cool stuff. So you can also find me there.
And you also facilitate the Journey Men's Group as well.
Yeah, I am the facilitator for the Journey Men's community. There's some cool stuff to come with that. If you are a part of Journey or have been in the past, you did your coaching certification with them, you're free to join that at any point in time.
That's why I have the Boba Fett helmet, because I don't like the term life coach, and like the moniker I go by is journeyman for hire, because I don't like the idea of a life coach. So I'm just more of a bounty hunter for your soul, if you will.
That's legit.
Mikey, thank you.
By any massive
no Sarlacc pits for me. I'll do my best to avoid it. Mikey, thank you so much, man. This was tremendous. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your services and what you're doing for the community and people in general, man. It's awesome. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I'll look forward to chatting to you soon.
Be well.